Thanks. Hey guys, yeah, thanks for coming. So in terms of the agenda, so as you know, phase 2 has been split over 2 days. So we've got today, which is Saturday, and then we've also got next Saturday. So the way we've done it and the way General Stream normally is essentially the project, you'll be building something in the front end, so you'll be building a website using React, but then you'll also be building a backend to it. So you'll be building an API and a database to store all the data that your front end will be interacting with. So in terms of the agenda, today you guys will be building the back end to this application or this project that you guys will be building, and then next week you guys will go over building the front end to integrate the back end, the APIs, the databases that you built today. So basically in terms of the intro, that's what we're doing at the moment. Next we'll kick it off in terms of MS SQL and setup, so that's setting up the database and getting an instance up into Azure. Following that, we'll then start look to build the API. So we'll open up Visual Studio, and then we'll create that default project. After doing that, we'll look into an introduction to GraphQL. So many of you may have heard of RESTful APIs. GraphQL is slightly different to that, and it's a new topic that we're introducing this year. So after we've kind of gone through the basics, we'll then have lunch at around 12:15. That'll be about an hour. And then once you guys get back from lunch, we'll start setting up the GraphQL in our project, and we'll start using Entity Framework to kind of link into the databases. After that, we'll do a little bit of stuff around data loaders and mutations, so getting those queries set up for your front end to start calling. And then we'll look at GitHub authorization if we've got a bit of time towards the end. So in terms of the project, I'll just switch over to this whiteboard and I'll kind of draw something up just so that you guys get a basic idea in terms of what the overall project will look like. Cool. So yeah, as you guys will be building the backend today, there won't be any front end for you guys to kind of refer to. So I thought what would be good is for me to kind of just walk through what you guys will be building next week, and then hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense in terms of the backend that you're building today. So if we think about websites, so you've normally got your Chrome browser, and that's this here. So for the front end and what your website will look like is essentially there'll be a header bar, and then what there'll be is there'll be a bunch of cards. And so for the phase 2 project that we'll be building across the weekend, just to demonstrate how to build this sort of stuff, what we'll be building is something we're calling as the MSA yearbook. And so essentially it will be a portal for you guys to submit your phase 2 projects. And so we thought this would be a good way to kind of demonstrate some basic functionality in terms of building a front end, building a back end, and then for the assessment, if you guys go to the link that David had just earlier, it will touch on the basic requirements and the advanced requirements. But in terms of what you guys will be building, there's something similar. So you'll have, for your front end, you'll be building these cards, and so you can submit whatever you want. So it could be like an image or a video, and then other people will be able to comment down below. And so these will be cards. And so in terms of the backend that you'll be building today is you'll be building a way to kind of store whatever content that your front end will be submitting and being able to store the comments that are within the cards. So think of it something like Reddit or like YouTube, how you can have on YouTube, you can have a video and then people can comment below. We'll be building something similar across today and next weekend. Yeah, so any questions so far? I understand starting with backend, it might seem a little bit abstract. Yep, question.
So for our system, we're going to build something similar to that?
Yep, so actually, yeah, I can probably bring up the assessment. We can maybe chat through it just very quickly before we get into today. But yeah, you'll be building essentially this. So what we'll be touching on over the course of the weekends, you guys can use that, and then it's just slightly making some changes to it. So rather than being an MSA submission portal, which wouldn't make sense for each of you guys to build, you can pick whatever you want using similar components. So whether it's something like Reddit, where you can submit posts, people can submit posts, and then other people can comment, or whatever you kind of want to do. But yeah, it will be pretty much what we go through this weekend. I'll switch it over just to, where is it, guest device. Cool. Thank you, David. Awesome. Cool, so yeah, I guess this is the assessment sheet, and this is already up in the GitHub that David's linked. So in terms of it, so yeah, like I say, individual assessment, basic requirements, so React TypeScript web app, so that'll be next weekend. This weekend, you'll be creating a backend using GraphQL, and you'll be saving the data to a relational database. And CZ will be presenting the session today, and he'll be going through all of it, so it should make a little bit more sense as we go through the day. Then there's something called Apollo Client, and so that's something that your front end will use to connect to the backend we're building today. And then there's just a bunch more sort of front end components that are required for the basic requirements. And then depending if we've got time, we'll also go through how to deploy the backend using GitHub Actions. But if not, we've got full documentation in terms of how to do that as well. And then a bunch of advanced requirements. So for the front end and back end, so we'll touch on the front end advanced requirements next week. But in terms of back end, using data loader, and we'll be going through that today. And then integrating a call to a public API, say if it's like GitHub or YouTube or Reddit, and just using that data in a meaningful way. So if this doesn't make a lot of sense at the moment, that's totally understandable. I'll touch on this again towards the end of today, and hopefully a lot of it will make a little bit more sense. And then I'll also touch on this again next weekend once we've kind of gone through building the entire project, and it should be all good. And like I say, and I think like David said, the submission will be in September, so you've got some time. And we can have some more sessions between the phase 2 workshops and before submission deadline, should you guys want some more help. Awesome, cool. So I guess that's kind of that in terms of brief intro. I guess we can probably pass it over to CZ to get into it. There's no other questions. Any other questions? Oh. And yeah, the MSPs are over here. So we've got myself, Coda, David, Paul, and CZ. And so if you guys need any help or have any questions during any of the presentation, just raise your hand and we can come and help you guys out.
I'm kind of learning GraphQL alongside you guys. Just put your hands up or things to you.
Cool.
But I'll try and help.
Sweet.
Ask a quick question. Is Ben Henshaw here? Ben Henshaw? Cool.
When you're ready to present, just tap these two buttons. Cool.
What's up, guys? I am CZ. I'm going to just do a quick self-intro. I'm supposed to be at a Kiwi Jam at Unleash Space, but you guys are more important, right? Yeah. Cool. So welcome back to Phase 2. Our current GitHub repo is on NZMSA 2020 Phase 2. This is where we will be keeping all our documentations, and all our code will also be here. So for you to look at, it is really important for you to have a look here, because I'm assuming this is going to be your Bible for the next month. So great. Lucky us, we are number 2, because front end didn't finish on time, so we're going first. So for the backend part, I just want to introduce to you how the backend part is going to be structured in terms of the GitHub repo. Currently, we have a table of content, and we have separated out the content into different parts. Each part will be linked to a different file, and all of them will have like detailed documentations, screenshots for you to follow. And at the very bottom, we also have a link to the next part. So that's the basic navigation through our parts. And also, we have also keep different parts of the code. So we can have, like, for example, part 5, we have code that is exactly at that checkpoint. So if you are up to part 6 but haven't done part 5, you can just copy the code from our repository and just carry on. The completed code is in the completed package if you guys want to check out the completed code. Cool. So today in general, the 2 major things I want to cover is GraphQL with .NET 5 and GitHub OAuth and authorization in .NET. So let's get started with just a basic intro. So as Coda has said pretty nicely, we are creating a very basic MSA yearbook. In this yearbook, we will be containing a bunch of students, projects, and comments. So just in general, we will have a bunch of students, which is users, which is a bunch of you guys. And then we have a bunch of projects that students can create. So an example is that a student can actually post multiple projects on our MSA yearbook, including comments. So like, for example, you could comment on someone else's project using your own username. Sorry about that. So that's the basic core concept of what we're going to build today. And this is a basic final product of what our API would actually look like. So we will just have a bunch of queries and a bunch of mutations. I will go through these in the next couple hours. And in terms of our data structure, so basically, we will just have a very simple data structure where we have students, projects, and comments. And as usual, we will have a bunch of, like, a student can have multiple projects, and a project can have multiple comments. And a comment is also related to a student, because a student can post a comment. So this is just a basic primary key and foreign key structure. If you guys haven't learned SQL, it's fine, because I'm going to go through it carefully with Entity Framework. Back to the docs. Oh, sorry. So otherwise, so like we have a couple of advanced requirements that we won't be teaching. This includes calling a public API, which will not be taught in this session. There are some other documentation that we have provided. So for example, we are using GitHub OAuth, so you could use the GitHub library to call the external API for like external data. We also did a YouTube API tutorial 2 years ago, which is pretty good, well done. You could go check it out. And you also feel free to use any other APIs. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for today, so we won't be going over data loaders, but it is a very recommended skills when you want to use GraphQL. So I highly recommend you to check it out. Just before we move on, is there any questions? Great. So let's move on. So before I want to move to the database, I just want to do a very short introduction to what exactly is GraphQL. So I'm going to just open up the final product to explore GraphQL with you guys. So currently, this is just basically Visual Studio, and I'm going to just run the thing. And this is our GraphQL endpoint that you have just saw in the screenshot. Give some time. And we have a bunch of queries and mutations. I might be going a bit fast, but I am assuming most of you are at least technically capable understanding what a basic network connection is, and you can like call data. So I'm going to just do a quick example of how to call stuff in GraphQL. So for example, I can make a very basic query, and based on projects, I can actually grab projects. And under projects, since I'm using Pagination, I'm going to just grab nodes. I'll talk about this later. I typed it wrong. And I just delete that. And in the project, we have ID, name, and maybe we have, in a project, we have a student, since a student has created the project. So we can grab the student's name from the project. And we can also grab a list of comments from the project. So ID and content. You'll be like, why am I using a bunch of like random things? So basically inside projects, as you can see in like when I'm calling projects, I can actually click into the schema and find projects. And I'll be able to see what fields I can actually call in my GraphQL API. So a feature in GraphQL is that I'm able to call different fields, and I don't have to call all of them, since if I call all of them, I'll be getting more data than I actually require on my front end. I can just call the data that I need when I'm building my front end using a GraphQL endpoint. So an example is I am calling name, but I am not calling description. So if we try run this, I wish it works. We can see that I am getting an array of projects. And inside the projects, I can get the student that created the project. Unfortunately, the name is random. And I can get the comments provided on the project. So these are all the comments that are on this project. And since I have multiple projects, you can see that there's another project here. So the idea in GraphQL is that you only need to call one endpoint to get all your data. You don't have to call multiple endpoints, then aggregate it in the front end. Everything is done in the back end, and the front end only requires to tell the back end what data it requires. So you've noticed this nested structure. A really cool feature cool query you can do is that instead of calling, like after calling students, and we click into students, like the student object actually also has projects. And in the project object, you can also get another student. So essentially, you are calling it. You can make recursive calls to get multiple layers of your data. So for example, I could get all the projects that I can get a list of projects and then get a list of students, one student from the project, and then list out their projects under their name. So let me just get projects, and I can hit ID and name. Unfortunately, this is our test data, so we don't have that many projects. As you can see, I am calling it recursively. And I can continue calling it recursively. And it would be accepted in GraphQL. So this is the general advantage of using GraphQL. You're not aggregating data in the front end, and you're not getting unnecessary data from the front end, like to the front end. So you're actually saving network connection and also speed in the front end. So you don't have to rely on the client's computer to compile or like aggregate all your data. So it's much faster in terms of making mobile applications and also web applications. So cool. I'm going to talk about mutations later. This is a general summary of GraphQL. So I'll just close this. And we're going to go back to documentations. So next, we're going to first start off by creating an Azure SQL database. The reason we want to do this first is it takes a while for Azure to create your database. So we just want to do it first, so while we're waiting for it, we can move on to other parts of this workshop. So first off, we're going to all jump on like Azure. Lucky me, I'm a student ambassador. No. So I wish everyone have an Azure account. If you don't, feel free just to follow along. You can always create an Azure account after the workshop. If you guys still need help, like setting it up, let us know. We can like help you, definitely. So back to database. So basically, first thing we're going to do, jump on. If you need a free student account, feel free just to click on that link just to redeem your subscription. I think you get $100 a year, so that's pretty nice. So first things first, we're going to create a new resource. And when we create a new resource, we're going to create a new SQL database. So basically, we have to choose a subscription. Make sure you choose your Azure Student subscription. And we're going to create a new resource group. So I'm going to just call this random MSA yearbook. I wish this resource is available. OK, it is available. And I'm going to just enter a database name. You can choose anything you want. I'm just calling it MSA yearbook for easy access. A book, I have 2 O's. Cool, the server part is a bit complicated. You just have to create a new server and make sure your server name is unique because every, I guess, URL has to be unique. So I'm going to just type MSA yearbook. Yeah, that's unique. Great. And you need to type in an admin login and a password. This is really important for you to remember your login name and password because you'll be using it to access your database. For me, I'm going to just do a random password generator. Six? That's too weak. So my username is CZ, and my password is random letters. For subscription, you want to choose the closest near you. Unfortunately, we can't choose others because my subscription don't support these regions. So you want to choose the only one available in Australia that we can choose, which is, where is it? Australia East, I think. Cool, let me just save my password on a random notepad. Great. So I'm going to just create the server. It's pretty fast. Here, we want to do something different. You'll notice that it's giving me a 2-core machine with 32 gigs of storage. That's kind of overkill for our purpose. So what we want to do is we want to just lower it down. So lucky for us, this year, Azure created a new service. It's not a service. It's like a compute tier called serverless. As you can know, serverless is great because you're not paying when it's not running. And you're probably not wanted to run 24 hours, 24/7. So I'm going to just hit serverless. And since I never need up to 40 cores and 128 gigs, I'm going to just lower it down all the way down to a max of 1. Let me just double check my settings, general purpose. Yep. That's the cheapest one. And also, auto pause delay. This is really important because our current SQL database is set up as a serverless database, which means if you don't access it for a certain amount of time, it would stop it, so you save money. But in our case, stopping it for 1 hour is kind of, booting it up is kind of slow. So I know that I probably will have this workshop for around 6 hours, so I'm gonna just hit 6. You guys can set it lower if you guys want. And for data max size, I'm gonna just decrease it all the way down to 1 gig because I am cheap. And zone redundancy, you probably don't need it, so I'm gonna just hit no. And wow, it's only 0.18 cents a month. That's 18 cents a month USD, which is quite cheap compared to last year. Last year was 5 USD a month, and it hit 1 year, so it's $100 a year. Cool, so we can hit apply, and now there are 3 different backup storage redundancy. I personally would choose the highest one, but I'm cheap, so I'm gonna click local. Basically, local means you would have it's actually 3 instances running in the same local data center. The idea of using local is that you don't have to pay for the transfer fees. Yeah, I'm very dirt cheap. You don't have to pay for the transfer fees from different data centers, which is way cheaper. But like it's only a couple of cents, so it doesn't matter. So let's just review and create. Great, 18 cents, perfect. And a bunch of things. Yep, looks great. So let's create it. It's going to take a while for it to create. So you'll notice it hits you up into like a deployment page, and you just have to wait for this.
I mean, anyone start have questions? I know we can't get through the past. Hands up if you need some help. Yeah, okay. Yep, it would take like a 2-minute break.
Cool. I'll just take a 2-minute break, guys.
Yep, no, that's okay.
Cool. Anyone else still need help? Great. Let's move on, guys. I'm just wondering, is anyone's database still deploying? Great. I'm going to just wait a couple. Let me think. Maybe I can move on to that. Hey guys, how many here has Visual Studio installed? Excellent. Okay, so right now let's just while we're waiting for everyone's database to deploy, we're going to create a very basic Visual Studio project just to start off. It's going to be really fast. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to open Visual Studio. Make sure you're somewhere around 2019. If you don't have 2019, you might want to install the .NET 5 package for the latest .NET version. So cool. So once we have this open, we can create a new project. And under the new project, we want to choose a suitable template. I believe the suitable template is ASP.NET Core Web API. Make sure it's Core Web API. It's the least amount of work to convert into a GraphQL API. So once we have the template selected, we can go next. And we can just name our project. I'm going to call this MSA Yearbook. And you can choose where you want it. I'm going to just keep it in the default folder because not my laptop. And once we type in the name, we can go next. In here, you need to make sure you choose the targeted version, which is .NET 5. We're using the latest, it's not latest, but it's the current stable version because we want to use the newest GraphQL library. And since we're using a GraphQL API, we actually don't need open API support, so we can just disable it. Once that's done, we can just basically create our project. since we have our project now, we can just try run it by pressing the start button at the very top. So it should start up a very basic template, and it should come up with a forecast. And that's basically a very simple REST API that we just set up using ASP.NET. Cool. Is anyone having any troubles or need help? If you guys missed how to create a project, feel free to go online and go on the GitHub documentations and be able to just follow through how to create a simple project. I think it's in part 3. For now, we're going to just move back to our deployed SQL database. And we're going to just click Go to Resource just to view our SQL database. And for us to be able to access the database anywhere, we will just set a server firewall. This isn't secure, but for our purposes, we are going to just enable 0.000 to 255.255.255. That means I am enabling the access to this range of IP addresses. So I'll just type everywhere. This isn't secure, because anyone can access your database. Like they can try DDoS you, or like send requests, or like try to brute force your password. But for our case, we aren't going to use this database for production purposes. And for simplicity, we'll just set that up. So when you go home and you're using a different IP addresses, it will still work. So we'll just save that. Yep. Hey guys, I forgot to tick allow Azure services and resource to access the server, so you want to tick that. Make sure you save when you tick it. Cool. So now we're done setting up firewall. Right now we're going to just copy the connection string from the side tab here. So if we go into connection string, we can just copy this. We will need it later to access our database through ASP.NET. So I'll just copy this. I'll throw in a notepad for now. And it also includes your password. You would want to replace the password you typed in into the connection string. So we will be using it once we set up our GraphQL API. It might take some time, so I highly recommend just keep it on the side, or else you have to come back in here and look for it. I think this concludes our SQL database part. So since we've already created a basic project, I'm going to just scroll through here. Before we move on, is there anyone with any questions or need help? Hey guys, just before I move on, I just want to ask you guys, are you guys feeling the pace is a bit fast or a bit slow? Fast? Just letting you guys know, it's going to go faster.
Sorry, I just think, like, sometimes, like, even though it like feels a little bit fast, but I guess like we only have like today as a full day, so just kind of get a feel of it, and if you feel like you need to spend a little bit of time understanding things a little bit more, just make sure you like read extra content and articles and stuff, just to like familiarize yourself with it. Even though you didn't understand absolutely everything today, you can go through it again.
Yeah, highly recommend you guys do self-study.
The session will be recorded, and there's full docs like as teaching is going through. Each step he's doing is fully documented, so if you get lost halfway through, feel free to go to the GitHub and just look at the docs, raise your hand, or I guess in the coming week you can always re-review what you've gone through as well. So.
Yeah, the goal is like really to get like started with the back end, because it's impossible to become expert in it in a day. So yeah.
Cool, I'm going to move on. Next, we're going to talk about Nuget packages. This is the default package manager for .NET. Also default for Visual Studio. So basically, since I don't want to waste you guys' time, I'm going to make you guys install all the packages we need at the very start, so we don't have to install them one by one while we are developing, because network speed, slow. So I'm going to just go through some packages we'll be adding. So the major one we'll be adding is NZ Framework, which is a very basic ORM to actually map our database, our SQL Server database, SQL, into objects in C#. Also .NET, yeah. So it helps us organize all our basic database. I'm assuming, like, if you've used .NET before, it's like one of the best libraries you can ever use. And since we're using SQL Server, we just need a very basic handler to handle SQL Server connections. So you'll be using that a little bit. And then since we're also maintaining our migrations inside .NET, we're going to use Entity Framework tools. We will go through migrations further when we're setting up GraphQL. So I'll just do a basic overview. Basically, migrations allows .NET to write your schema changes in a certain way that allows you to update it through code. That was a bad example. So next, we're going to install Hot Chocolate. It's a pretty good drink. So currently, I'll just go through Hot Chocolate. Hot Chocolate is, so basically, .NET has their own GraphQL library. It's absolutely trash. So people open source made a better library, which we are using today, which is called Hot Chocolate. So here is the Hot Chocolate websites. This is probably the best place for you to get more information about how to set up GraphQL in .NET. I've spent like a month on this, so you should probably too. So here are the docs. It tells you introductions. We will be using version 11 because version 10 is deprecated already. So we're using version 11. I think we're using version 11.4 or 0.3. But it should be very similar. So basically, we'll be using Hot Chocolate for our GraphQL endpoints and also mapping. There's a very lovely get started if you guys want to read through. There's also a bunch of other docs. Also, since one of the advanced features I talked about, data loaders, it is actually located in here. So if you guys want to read more about data loaders, feel free to jump on Hot Chocolate's documentations and read through. And since so the first package is ASP.NET.Core. So basically, we needed to set up our endpoint. And next, we're going to use a data library from Hot Chocolate that includes Entity Framework. So Hot Chocolate has really good integration with Entity Framework, which allows us to write less code, which is great for you guys. And since we want to do some authorization and authentication, we're going to use Hot Chocolate's authorization and then a simple JWT token generator and GitHub's official library. So to install packages in your solution, there's two ways of doing it. I'll just show you two images first before we go in. So the first way is we can use the manage Nuget package solution, which is basically opens up this, and then you can search packages up and click install. So I'll just do that in front of you guys right now. We'll just open up tools, Nuget package manager. Is it console? I think it's package setting. It's not setting. OK, I think I clicked the wrong thing. What is wrong? Huh.
Are you trying to open the package manager? Good.
Yep.
If you open your solution,
oh, I'm running right now. Let me just stop it first. OK, now it comes up. So because I was running the REST API currently, so it wouldn't allow me to open up the Nuget package solution. So make sure you stop your API before you can open this. So an example is I could browse a certain package like Entity Framework. And then since we want Entity Framework Core, we can directly click on it. And make sure you click on a tick on your project, and then you can click on install to install the package. And I'll just do accept, I accept, and then you install a package. So that's a basic way of installing packages. To me, I hate it. So what we can do is we can instead use the command line tool. So we can use package manager console instead. So we can way faster just copy this bunch of command lines, and we can tools Nuget package manager console, and it opens up a console, and you can actually just paste all of that in, and it just installs for you. This will take a while, so if anyone has any questions or need help, let us know. I just looked in this error. I don't think I need to install data. Hey guys, has everyone installed the packages? Is anyone still installing? Because I'm going to move on. Hey guys, I'm going to move on. We're going to start coding, so it's going to be a little bit faster. Not a little, but a lot. So let's start off by deleting unnecessary stuff. A couple of steps here I won't be putting in the docs, so thank God you're here. First thing, we're going to just delete controllers because we'll never use it. It's GraphQL. Controllers exist in REST. We don't use REST. Delete. And weather forecast, we also don't need that. That's like a random object that is in the template. Cool. Now our project, you'll notice that it probably won't run because it's trying to add controllers, which we just deleted, and it's also mapping controllers, which we also deleted. Cool. So before we delete that, let's start off very simple by using Entity Framework. We're going to create a very simple model. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to right-click on the project, and we're going to add a new folder. And what our folder name is going to be, we're going to call it models. In models, we're going to create a new file, which is new item. And it's going to be a class. We're going to call it students. So why am I starting off with students? Students doesn't rely on any other objects. So for example, a project would rely on a student because the student has to create it. And a comment has to rely on a student and a project because a project is, like a comment is on a project. So we'll just call it student. And now we have a class. Something I like to do is I'd like to delete that, but for now, let's just keep it there. So first thing, we are defining an entity model. So like on Entity Framework, you can define objects that are related to, are mapped to the database. So for example, our student, if we looked at the previous diagram, where we have basic students, and we have a student ID, a GitHub name, a general name, and an image URL. Let me just explain these. So basically in SQL, every row in a table in SQL, it requires an ID that is unique. Normally in SQL, it increments. So for example, the first row will be 1, second row will be 2, and it increments down. Whenever you add a new student, it will grab the newest ID. So I'll just talk about GitHub. The reason we have GitHub is actually GitHub username. It's here because we want to do OAuth, which is basically when you log in, sign in with GitHub, we will be able to grab your GitHub name. We assume your GitHub name is unique, and by using that, we could sign you in based on your GitHub name. And also name is your real name. So for example, on GitHub, feel free to click the follow button, please. Just saying. This is my name, and this is my username. So we're just grabbing the GitHub username and your name. And also image URL, that's just a basic avatar for profile pictures. So that just create these four fields. So first thing, we're going to create a basic ID. It's going to be a key attribute in Entity Framework. So let's call it ID. And oh, shit. You always forget the most simple thing. So basically, we'll create a public ID. Public, I think it's an integer. And it's going to be ID, and we're going to just define get and set. And now we have a key. So since we have a key, we'll probably also insert a string for name, and that'll be just get and set as well. And we'll also do a GitHub. Get and set. And at the very end, we have an image URI. URI just stands for a direct link to an image, like an actual image file.
Are you able to zoom in a little bit?
How do you zoom in Visual Studio? Bottom left. I am so lost. What's this?
Yep.
Excellent. That's a bit large. So image URL, just get and set, same thing. So something we want to do is we'll notice that key is underlined. Basically, we just need to try import Entity Framework to this. So we'll just click on Show Potential Fixes when you hover onto it. And it will come up with the first one, use system.model data annotation. And we'll just use it. I think it works. Yep, great, it works. And now it's defined. And since, just for secure reasons, we'll just set name to be required, because we want to actually have someone to have a name. and will also and GitHub will also be required because we need it for them to log in. We're not going to put any constraints on like max length, max like how long the characters have to be. You can figure that out yourself, but for our case, we're not going to do that. So this is our basic model. So for us to, after setting up the basic model, we need to set up, I just realized something. Instead of students, this should be called students. So I'm going to just rename this file just in case. Like, I prefer having it singular. And when you rename a file, it actually automatically renames your class name as well. So if you press yes, the class name should be renamed as well. So after creating our first model, we need to create a database context. So what we're going to do is, I prefer having my database context in a different folder. So I'm going to just create a new folder. And I'm going to call it data. After creating the data folder, I'm going to create a new file, new class actually, a new element. I'm going to call it app DB context. So this is basically my database context, or data context, database context. So in here, I want to, the database context is actually an extension of a different class, which is DB context. Spelled right. And since this is not imported, we're going to do the same thing, show potential fixes, use entity framework core, and now it's imported. Great. Like for our database context, normally I prefer having a constructor because it's very useful to add other stuff in the future. However, we will not be using this constructor for like major purposes and like currently in this session. So it's going to be options, and it's going to just base options. And in here, we also have to define our model. So it actually knows where our models are. So we're going to do another public set. I'm going to put student, and student's going to be students. So this is where we'll be able to access all our models. So I'll get and set. And also we need to import that. So basic fix. And now we have everything imported. So this is our basic database context. So for database context to work, we actually have to register it with our API. To set it up, we just have to go to startup. And you notice how it's adding controllers here. Instead of controllers, we want to add a new database context. So for our purposes, I'm going to just start off by using a pool database factory. So what this will do is we will be able to use this to create multiple contexts. And we're going to set options, and it's going to be an arrow function. And we're going to do options.use SQL Server. And we're going to set up configuration. So we're going to just use the configuration file to get our SQL database connection string. So there's going to be configuration.get connection string. And the connection string can be any name because you have to just set up your own name. I'm going to just start by calling it default connection. So since we need to import these as well. I'm going to put this on a new line so it looks much better. Tab. And I forgot to add a column at the back. Check my error list. I have 0 errors. Perfect. So now we've registered our app DB context into our service. Since we're using a connection string, you're wondering, where do I want to put my connection string? So for now, we currently have app settings. So you can put your connection string in app settings, and we will be able to get it using configuration and get. But the issue about putting it in app settings is you would be git committing this file onto your project. Like you'll push it to Git, like GitHub, and it'll be public. You do not want your connection string to be public. Unfortunately, we can't use other tools because it's not free. So we're going to use a very hacky method, which is basically we're going to use app settings.development.json instead. But for this to work, you have to make sure you add app settings.json into your git ignore when you push this to GitHub. That's just a reminder. If I see your connection string on your GitHub, that's a big issue. So we'll just set up connection string here. At the very bottom, we'll do connection string, strings, because it's multiple strings. And we'll just set up our default connection under connection strings. So you can actually have multiple connection strings under here, but we'll just use one for now. And we'll just copy the connection strings we had previously. Sucks. Great. And 2 W's. What? There's a comma, which shouldn't be there. Okay, I'll just recopy it, just in case I copied it wrong. Cool, now it works. So now I have a connection string. I can just save it. So so if we go back to startup, I forgot, I don't need the. Which one? Line number 8. Oh, right. Make sure you add a comma at the end of the file, because it's JSON. You have to make sure the syntax is correct. Great. So if we go back to startup, we'll notice that we are getting the connection string, and this will get the default connection string. So now we have the connection string set up. We can actually do some migrations. So first what we're going to do is we are going to open up Package Manager console, what we use to install our packages. It is also available at the very top here as well, if you can't find it. So in here, we're going to just type in add migration. And for our first migration, we'll just call it initial migration. So when you run this migration command, what it will do is it will create a migration for you. So we'll notice it's build successful. And now we have this brand new folder in our project called migrations. You'll notice there's an initial migration now. So if we look into initial migration, you'll notice it just basically creates a table for you and sets up all the fields that you just set up. Before we move on to updating our actual database, I'm going to just ask if anyone needs help. Or like, is anyone not catching up? Has anyone not created a migration? Because we won't be able to do the next step if you don't have a migration. So once we create the migration, we can actually run the migration. I haven't ran yet. So basically, we can run the migration by typing update database. And this will update the database using your connection string. So if it succeeds, it means that your database is now updated to the current schema. Just a note, this might fail for the first time if you're using serverless. So for example, your serverless has stopped because you haven't touched it for a certain amount of time. For example, if you set an hour on default, like if you haven't touched it for an hour and you try to call the database, and the database hasn't started yet, it will send you an error. You just have to recall it again. If this doesn't work, you can still make the API, but you just won't be able to hit the database. So like, it won't send any information back, but all the other stuff should work. So I can still follow along with the workshop. Hey guys, anyone still need help? I'm going to move on, so we're going to actually be on time for lunch. Cool, I'm going to move on. So great, now you've set up your migration. What are we going to do with it? Nothing. Next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create our first GraphQL query. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by creating a new folder. The folder name is going to be GraphQL. This is where I'm going to put all my GraphQL classes and objects so everything's nice and close together. In here, I want to create a new folder, a nested folder. So like inside GraphQL, I want to create another folder. I want to call it student. It's plural, by the way. So this is where I'm going to put all the files related to students, including queries, mutations, types, resolvers, and all that crap. So now we're going to add a new file inside students. It's going to be called student queries. And now we have a new file called student queries. So first thing before we add in queries, we need to first extend this class type with an attribute called queries. So we're going to extend object type with a name called queries. Query, yeah. And since this is not imported, I'll just import this. So what this does is this tells this class is actually a query class where I can throw into queries. So let's implement our first query. So doing a very basic query, we're going to just do iQueryable. And this is going to be student, like the student object that we created for our database. And we're going to get students. Since it's queryable student, it's going to be multiple students, like an array of students. So it's going to be plural. And in here, we're going to use a scope service. I think it's scoped service attribute. And we're going to write app.db context. This is where we're going to use our database context. So using the database context, we can actually now access our database models. So for example, in context, I can access students. So you'll notice in database context, there is a field called students. So basically, I am just accessing this field using the context. So before we do anything, let's just import everything. You'll notice it's still erroring here. It's because we haven't actually returned the value, as it says it requires a return value. So what we're going to do is we're going to just return students. GraphQL, Hot Chocolate is actually very smart. So when it sees a queryable student, it actually converts this into an array of students. So now we've created our first query. I am not going to go in deep about what this query does, because we will never see this query again. But basically, this is our query. And for this class, we need to first register this class to our GraphQL server, which is located in startup. So what we'll do is we will change, we'll first register our GraphQL server. So right after our database, our DB, after we register our database context, we want to register a new service for GraphQL. So in here, we'll just do services, and we're going to add GraphQL. And we'll do a GraphQL server, I think. Yeah, GraphQL server. And after adding a GraphQL server, we want to define add queries, query type. But since we want to add multiple query types, we're going to just first do a very empty object for queries. So it's going to be query.name, just like the other one. And query.name is going to be query. D.name is going to be query. So what this does is it just basically creates an empty query object where we can extend from, which we will do by adding extension, by adding type extension. And our type extension will be our student query class. Let me just import student queries. So what this does is basically adds in our GraphQL server to our service, and also adds in our query, a new query object, and we add in our student queries. So to actually set up the server correctly, we need to go down here, and instead of mapping controllers, we want to map GraphQL endpoints. And authorization will not need that currently, so I'm going to just delete it. So now we have a basic GraphQL server where we map the endpoints, and we also added our GraphQL server to services. So this should work. So let's try running the application. And you'll notice there's an error because it's trying to reach weather forecast, which we had just deleted previously. Just a note, this will not be in the documentation. So I highly recommend you guys just take a look at this. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this little arrow beside your run button. And we're going to click on MSA yearbook debug options. So in here, we can actually change our weather forecast launch settings. So what we can do is we can actually change weather forecast to GraphQL. So therefore, we can actually hit the GraphQL endpoint that we created. And since there's actually 2 runtimes, we want to actually also change the other one, just in case if someone tries to run that one as well. I mean profiles, and not runtimes. So once you have both set as GraphQL, you actually don't need to save this. You just press start, and it should open up GraphQL directly in the browser, as you can see here. And now we've opened up a lovely GraphQL client. This is the default hot chocolate GraphQL client. It will only be enabled when you're in debugging mode. So currently, you're only seeing this in debugging mode. We'll only view this. This will be where you insert your queries. And to view your schema, you want to click schema like here to view your schema. So you'll notice there's currently just one schema which we define, which is student queries. And it returns you an array of students. And it returns a bunch of the values that you have just set up. You'll also notice that currently, the fields that we set required for is currently exclamation mark. This is GraphQL syntax for saying that this field is required and non-newable. So that's the basic. So now we've created a very basic GraphQL endpoint. I'm going to just pause here and ask if anyone has any questions or like need any help. Cool. So just letting you guys know, back to the docs. We just finished step 5, which is set up hot chocolate. As you guys are following, we've noticed that we actually created our GraphQL endpoint, and we noticed our first endpoint. And now that's basically how to set up a very generic hot chocolate server. We won't be able to query anything yet because the database is currently empty, and we haven't set up some of the query features and resolvers. Does anyone have any questions? Because we are 15 minutes early for lunch, and I do not want to move to the next part. If we're all happy, we can like end early. Anyone agree of ending early? Can I give it like hands up?
You guys run into like a lot of issue and get stuck and stuff. That's what a normal day looks like for software engineer anyways.
Ah.
Get used to it.
So since we have like extra 15 minutes, just for fun, I'm going to like teach you guys how to actually put this on Git, just in case you guys commit your connection string. So personally, it's a bit hacky, but like what I like to do is first I will stop the thing. We can actually hit Git. We can create a Git repository. Let's just create one. You can either click local only or GitHub, but like, do I have to enter this? No. Okay, it works. Great. So I'm going to just call this MSA yearbook test for fun. And I am going to just create and push, but that's a bad idea. So before you create and push, you want to be careful. And I'm going to just open up the directory just in case. I can't open this up. Life sucks. So I'm going to just go find it first. Is it here? It's not here. So C resources. OK, great. So I'm going to just open it up manually because sources, repos, and this is my yearbook. And so I want to just create. OK, great. I'm going to just create a Git. I'm doing this for the first time. So I'm going to just create a local one just in case. I don't want to commit it directly. So local repository, that's local repositories Git phase 1. Oh, it's already in a repository, that's why. Wait, is it? No, it's not. So I'm going to create a Git repository. I'm going to do a local one just in case. And this is the local path I'm going to just create. So now I have a local one. And you'll notice it automatically generates these 2 files, which is really nice because if you view into these files, these contains all the general Visual Studio temporary files, build files, binary files. It just like removes all of them. But for us, we want to also remove app settings.develop.json. So we'll just like add it at the very end. .json. So we don't commit it. And it's going to still be here, but you won't be able to commit it. So let's try committing something. We can either use like the commit interface here. And this is bad because I think it already committed. So I'm going to just like check for it. Repos, MSA. Status. Okay, so it already committed it, which I do not want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove .git. So it removes my Git repository. I'm on Windows. So I'm going to just delete it manually because I am. So I'll just delete the Git folder and recreate it. So if we notice, once we add all our files and we type git status, we'll view all our files. You'll notice that app settings will be included, but app settings.development will not be included. So that's just a basic thing. Make sure you remove it off your repo. And just a note, make sure you create it from an empty GitHub repo because GitHub stores history. So if you add it into your Git repo and then remove it, it's still in your history. If you accidentally commit to GitHub, I highly recommend you change your password or delete the database. It also works. But it's just a clear because we're going to be using GitHub OAuth secrets in the future, like afternoon, which might affect you more than a database. Great. Is there any questions or any things you guys want me to clarify? Yeah. Cool. Hey guys, we're going to start our lunch break. So for those who still need help, feel free to stay here. We'll help you out. If not, feel free to go have lunch. We'll be back at 1:15. 1:15, guys. Meet you at 1:15. The fuck? Just check. Still recording. Yeah, still recording, sweet as. Hey guys. Great. I wish you guys had a great lunch. We're going to start on part 6, implementing queries. Where are we? Cool. So now, since setting up GraphQL, We've set up most of hot chocolate, and we've set up most of the basic fundamentals of how to do hot chocolate. Now we're going to just set up all the other objects in our database. This includes project, comments, since we already have students. So what we're going to do first is we are going to define project. So let me go back to our project. So inside the models folder, we want to create a new class. That's a wrong button. We want to create a new class called project. So inside the project folder, as we see in the diagram, we will be adding name, description, link, year, and student ID. So that's added in. So first thing, we want a key, which is ID. And that's a public int. And next is name. We want a name of our project, which is a string. And we want a description. So basically, under a project name, we want to just add in a simple description for our front-end app. And we'll just add another string called link. This is going to be the link to your GitHub repository that you'll be able to post. And since we want a foreign key, so we'll just do another integer, which is, we'll just call it student ID. And we'll just set the same attributes. Let's go back. So what is required? I think name is required. And GitHub link is required. Let's fix our imports. So you'll notice we have students. Students is going to be a foreign key. So it's going to also be required. And since this is entity framework, we are able to create another variable called public student. And this student object will be just called student. And it'll get the same values. So basically what entity framework will do is it will notify that this is a foreign key to student ID, and you will be able to use this student ID to get the student object. So that is basically project. So we'll just create comments. So I'll add a new item, and we're going to just call it comment. Inside comment, it's going to be more basic. It's just a basic ID. And after the ID, we'll just have, I'm going to call it string content. So the content of your comment is basically what you would comment. And since a comment is foreign key to a project and should have a foreign key to a project and also a foreign key to a student, because a student is writing a comment. So we'll do an integer. Let's do student first, doesn't matter. So we require a student ID since since a comment must be from a student, and a comment must be also on a project. Yep. Oh, content. I'm sorry about it. Great. Thanks. Cool. So just like projects, we are going to add in the student object. And this will be exactly the same for projects. An interesting part is, since we have, so a project can have multiple comments. What we can do is on projects, we can add a new relationship, a new object called public. So we'll just add an interface collection, so just an I collection. And it will be a collection of comments. You could say this is a list if you want. And we'll just say comments. So it's a multiple comments. And we'll just set and get and set. And since this is a list, we want to make sure that we initialize it so it doesn't error out when you, it won't be nil when you call it. So we'll just do new list of comments. So this will be just an empty list. Interestingly, due to projects and comments, we want to add some dates to our comments so we know which comment came first. So in comments, we're going to just add in some dates. So we're going to use public date time. And we'll just do a modified date. And also a created date. We're using a modified date so we know when someone edited a comment and when they created it. Since I'm kind of lazy, so I'm going to just copy this back into projects. So it's like modified date and created date. Because I also want to keep track of when projects are created and modified, because students can actually modify their projects. So now we have our models defined. We have to go back to students. Just letting you know, everything is on the documentation, so if you're not keeping up, feel free just to copy the code in the documentation. Also, let me know if I'm missing anything from the docs. So we could go back to students. And inside students, we just want to do the same thing where we did multiple comments inside a project. We'll just do a student owns multiple projects. So this will be a I collection as well, and it will be a collection of projects. And this will be projects, and we can get and set. And since we want to make sure it initializes as an empty list, we'll also initialize it. And I want to do the same thing for comments, because the student can also comment on multiple, and can also make multiple comments, and we just want to have a collection of comments that the user has posted. Now all our models are set up. Since we've added 2 new models, we also have to add the models into our database context. So going to our app database context, we will just be adding the 2. So public db set, and we have projects get set. I'm going to pause for a second for everyone to catch up. Does anyone need help or like wants to ask any questions? Cool, so I'll be moving on. Here we will be, since after defining our models, we actually haven't defined any relationships in our models. So we will just replace this, replace this method in our extended DB context. It's called, I think it's on model create. So we'll just use protected overrides, since we're overriding extended method. And it's on model creating. And the input is just a model builder. And then here we need to define our relationships between our models. So we'll just use the model builder to create our relationship. So for the entity, let's start off with projects. So for the entity projects, a project, this is a bit difficult to understand, but if you want to know more about how the model builder works, I highly recommend you go through entity framework docs. They explain a lot. So for now, I'm going to just define the entity projects. It's projects, not projects, since we want the object. Has one. And has one will use the child component. So imagine if we do an error function in here. So P is actually project. So if you hover over P, it actually tells you the type of the parameter, and it's project. So for the project P, we want to has one student. So basically, we want to get, so a project P has one element, one student. And since student is already defined as a field that is related to the object student, it knows what is a student. So since it has one student, we also have to define how many student it has. So if we look here and we type a parameter, and we hover over it after drawing the arrow, you'll notice the type is student. So a student has many projects. So basically, you're doing a very common relationship. You're just defining the relationship between your models, where a project only has one student, but a student can have multiple projects. Since we're using foreign keys, we also have to define our foreign key that we have in our model. So I'll do foreign key. And surprisingly, if we also hover over which one this is, over P, you'll notice it's project. The reason why I'm using P and S is just for me to visually tell which object I'm actually looking at. So you can actually call it anything as a parameter. So the foreign key for students is student ID. So we're just going to define the same thing for the other objects. So for example, we can define it for comments. And a comment has one student. And with many, we'll just define the other side as well. So this is a student has many comments. And we're defining a foreign key for for students. So we'll do the same thing for a relationship between a comment only has one project. So c.project. And we can have with many, because a project can have multiple comments. And also, we want to define our foreign key as a value we already defined, which is project ID. Cool. So now we've defined our model and our relationships. So there's an issue with SQL like servers. So basically, to explain it really fast, foreign keys are really nice because imagine you have a student and a comment. The comment has a foreign key to the student. So for example, the student made a comment, right? What happens when the student is deleted? By using foreign keys, Entity Framework will create a constraint that automatically deletes, it's called deletes the comment of the student that got deleted. But however, SQL servers only supports deletion of a single foreign key. But you'll notice here we have two foreign keys on a single object. In SQL terms, it would result into an cascade cycle. You probably don't need to know this, but for our sake, we won't be deleting anything. So to fix that, we'll just have to set one of the foreign keys as when you delete it, you just want it to behave by doing nothing. So there will no longer be a cycle issue. This is a little bit hacky, but for our case, it works perfectly fine. Just a note, so if you're using any other SQL database like MySQL, Postgres, that will work. It's just Microsoft SQL Server sucks. Cool, so now we've defined all our models. You'll notice something. Our database actually hasn't been migrated. So if we go on Azure, and we go on Query Editor, and what's my password? I'm going to just use the password just in case. So I'm just going to log in. You'll notice our database actually still has the old database, but it doesn't have the other tables. So what you want to do is you want to also make a migration. So the same thing as a migration, we'll just do add migration. If you're on Mac OS, make sure you use the Discord command that's on Discord. And this time, we'll just call our migration a different name. So we'll just call it add. I'm in PowerShell. That's the wrong one. I need to go in Package Manager console. And instead of initial, you want to just type in whatever name you want. So right now, I am adding project and comment. So that's what I'm going to call my migration. And I can just run the migration, make the migration file. Oh, I failed to build. Interesting. So there's an issue in my project. So I just click into errors. I forgot brackets. So that's normal. So now if we try run it again, that should succeed. And you'll notice in your migration files, there is a new migration for add projects and comments. And to update your database using the migration file, you'll use the same update database command that you'll be using from last time. So let's try to run this. So now it's done. Just the same note, since we're using serverless database, if it doesn't work the first time, try it again, because your database is booting. And now if we check Azure, we'll be able to view the new database. Shitty password, doesn't work. And now we have a bunch of tables, and now we've created our new tables. So if we click into our tables, you'll notice they're all defined based on what we just defined with our foreign keys and all our different variables. So now we've implemented our SQL database. Just before we move on, I just want to ask, is anyone having trouble migrating or like setting it up? Hey guys, I'm going to move on. So cool. So I've seen a bunch of people running the thing already, so we're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to run it. You notice there's no changes. It's because you need to refresh the schema. Pressing the refresh button won't work, just like someone who tried there. Yes, we're flaming you. We have to click the reload schema button. It's because the schema is cached on the client side. Therefore, if you click the refresh button, now you'll see your project and comments. So now you can click into your comments and clients. They have like a relationship kind of thing. Cool, but there is an issue right now. So there's an issue with hot chocolate where when you call nested elements, it actually won't give you the nested element because of how entity framework works. You can't get multiple nested elements. So to fix that, we're going to create something called a resolver and an object type. So what we'll do is we're going to come back to our project, and I'll just stop this. We're going to create a new file under GraphQL students, and we're going to add a new item under GraphQL students. We're going to call it student type. And now we have a student type. So what is a student type? We're going to extend an object called object type, and it's going to have a generic type of student. Let me just import that. Using hot chocolate types, and I need to import that from models. Great. So first things first, we are going to override configuration. So it's a protected method, and we're going to override it. It's called configure actually. And now we have configure, object type, student, descriptor, and all that stuff. Really good stuff. And I'm going to just delete this. We don't need this. And we'll just set up some descriptors. So first thing, the object student type will always have an ID. So we're going to use descriptor.field. And the field is going to be, since this is a student, I'm going to use S. And this is s.id. And what is the ID? The ID is basically the type of, since everything is non-newable, we're going to type in non-newable type. And inside non-newable, we're going to nest it with another generic called ID type. And since it's a function, I'm going to write a function. So what this line does is I am describing my schema. So I'm saying that the student type object will always have an ID field. That is the type non-newable ID. So I'm going to go through something a bit more complicated. But if you go on you probably don't need to follow this, but like if we go on the docs for hot chocolate, you'll notice there are different types of coding methods. One is annotation-based, which is what we've been doing right now, which we create objects and hot chocolate automatically sees the object and creates the schema for you. But there's some limitations to this, which is where when you create resolvers, you can't actually define the resolvers as nicely as in code first, which we will be doing right now. So in code first, we'll be able to create an object type where we can describe the object using code, which is basically using this code. And this will be what we're going to be doing for all our objects. Cool, so we have a descriptor.field is ID. So what's the next thing for the object students? We have a name, GitHub, and image URI. And let's create them. So descriptor, field, student, and this is name, I believe. And the type is also non-nullable because we don't want it to be nullable. And in here, it is a string. Is it string type? String type. And we'll just do it for the other one as well. I really can't be bothered, so I'm going to just copy this line. And how many do we need? We need ID, name, GitHub, and URL. That's too much. So this is image URI, and this is GitHub. Cool, so that's a string, string, string. Since the last one is technically nullable, but I can't be bothered with it, so I'm going to keep it as a string, so I'll return an empty string if it's null. Or it would error out, which is, that won't matter in our case. So after describing these, we want to describe the other fields that is also in student. So if we look at student, we have projects and comments. So how do we want to describe them? First, we want to create a resolver. So what this resolver will do is it will resolve, for example, when someone goes on the GraphQL schema, and it's a close file. So if someone calls, let's say this, right? They calls projects on a student object in the GraphQL schema, it won't know what to do because it's not defined. So we can use a resolver to resolve the results from the projects. So an example will be, if I want to get the projects for a student, I would use the student ID to query for all the projects that has the student ID equal to this student ID. So we'll just do it right here. So first thing, that's do projects. So we'll just do a simple async method. I'll explain why we want to use an async method. I wish all of you know what an async method is. If not, I'll just briefly explain it. Since it is going to be a list, we want to return a list, a collection of projects, and we want to get projects, and the input is going to be student. So why is the input student? Like, why is the first parameter student? So basically, this is the parent. So for example, when you're calling this, you will be calling student, and then you will be getting the projects from a student. So therefore, you want the student object as the parent of this call. And then since we are going to use the DB since we're accessing the database, we want to use scoped service. I think scoped. It is scoped service. Great. And in the scope service, we are going to call app db context, and we'll just do context. I'm going to explain something about cancellations. So I'm going to just import cancellations at the very bottom, at the very end. How do you spell cancellation? It's called a cancellation token. And OK, that autocorrect is only. And we now have a cancellation token, and let me just import it. And cancellation token. I'll just put this on the new line so it looks nicer. So in this function, we want to return a list of projects from the student. So we're going to use await because this is an async function. And we are going to use context.projects. And we're going to do a very basic filter of the basic query or filter, if you want to call it. So we want to where in the database where the project has p.project ID, which is actually ID because this is already a student ID actually, is equal to the student.id from our parents. So basically, we are filtering through projects and getting all the projects with the student ID equal to the parent student from this call. Interestingly, we need to actually make this an array, because this will return a bunch of other results. So we want to do toArray async to actually call the thing. But since it's an async function, it won't actually stop. So what you want to do is you want to pass in the cancellation token. Let me just import this. So before we move on, I kind of want to explain what is a cancellation token. So in this call, async calls are calls that are more of like a blocking call, where when you call it, it will block your code and wait until the result of the blocking code is returned before doing the next code. So let me just import where capital. That should work. Cool. So since it's a blocking code, when your code is already being blocked, you can't actually stop the code from being blocked. You have to wait for the result. So what you want to do is you want to use a cancellation token. Cancellation token is basically kind of a signal from, kind of like a signal where if the user, as a user, I'm calling the GraphQL, I cancel my request, which is basically like close the browser or press cancel, for example, or stop fetching. What the server will do, what .NET will do, will send a cancellation token request down the chain, which is through here, and then it will pass to this async function, which is also a blocker, and tell it to stop blocking, and say that I no longer need this request, so therefore you don't have to get the request anymore. So it just speeds up your database. So for example, imagine you're calling something really intensive, like calculating a large equation that's going to take 10 minutes. But if the user keeps calling it, but they always cancel at the end, then the user never gets the result, but you still have to calculate for the 10 minutes. So instead, using cancellation token, you could cancel it before getting the result. So when the user cancels it, you don't have to keep calculating. Just a note, this will probably be the only time I use cancellation token because I'm lazy. But like, it is highly recommended in your code that if you see an async function, you want to always pass down the cancellation token down to any blocking code. So now we've designed a Git project. We can actually now describe what actually does the field projects do. So the field projects, right, when you call the field projects, what it will do is it should resolve using, so we're going to do resolve with, so we're using the resolver. And the resolver is going to use resolvers, which is down here. And let me just put it on a new line so it looks nicer. So I'm going to use the resolver to do our. So I'm going to use, in the resolver, I'm going to use the function get projects. And using this function, I need to pass in the default values for these. So we'll just go default exclamation mark, which is basically must. I'm actually not sure. But like, I think cancellation token is knowable, so therefore you do not need an exclamation mark for the last parameter. So after calling this, you want to also use DB context to ensure that your, I'll explain this later, but it's really important to use a DB context here. It's a bit complicated, but down the road, I'll explain why. So we're going to use app DB context. And we need to also define the type. Interestingly, because the type is actually a list of projects, what we need to do is we need to do a non-knowable list. So we'll do a non-knowable list, but your non-knowable list must be a list of non-knowable projects. Did I overkill this? I did. What the? Oh, it's list type. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. And projects. It's projects type, because I am calling projects type, which is apparently not defined yet, so we need to define project types. And we will be also defining one for the other variable, which is a student that has multiple comments. So we'll just do comments. So descriptor.field is so I'm going to just copy all of this just to make my life easier. And I want to resolve get comments, and I am actually inserting for some reason. And default and comment type. Cool, so we'll just define the same function here. Since we want to get a list of comments by this user, well, get comments, and then instead of projects, we want to do comments. And And student ID, it is still student ID, and student ID is equal to that. Instead of P, I want to use C because comments is lowercase. It starts with C. I like to keep stuff consistent. And I just have to change projects to comments. Great, so we've implemented the first type. This is the basic way of implementing types. Since implementing types is very time consuming, instead of actually typing the other ones out, I'm going to just copy from the docs. Feel free to do the same thing. So we are on implement queries and object type. This type is project, and I need the other type for comments. So I have to create a, since I need to create a new folder for them. So I'm going to start off with comments because I copied comment first. And we will do comment type. And there we go. Did I? Oh, it's my class name's different, so I'll just like change the class name. What was my class name? It is underscore. Interesting. And models. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Interesting. So then we need to also define projects types. So we're going to create a new folder, projects, and a new class. And we will copy from projects. Cool, let me just go over them before we finish. Oh yeah, we forgot about year. We were supposed to define an enum for year. So in the projects model, we want to actually define, that was ages ago, let me find it. So we want to define an enum called year. So instead of having year as a string, we want to actually define it like a constant. So that's above models. So let me just define this. So basically, we wanted to design the application to be very flexible, and we can support multiple years for different students at MSA. We wanted to create different years. So for example, this year, we're just called year 2021. And every year, we can like put a different enum, and then we can grow as the project grows. So instead of using year, oh, apparently I don't have year in here. So that's not in year. And we'll call it year. The get and set. Whenever we change our model, we also have to do another migration and updates. So I'm going to just do it really real quick. Let me check for errors before I do migrations. I have errors. So let me just fix these errors first. So GraphQL projects, get project is wrong. So apparently I need to add another default. I'm sorry for really bad docs, but you gotta figure out how to debug it. I even spelled modify wrong. Wow. That's a new case. And comments.student. So it's actually project instead of comments. And assembly type. So project type isn't imported, so we'll just import it in because now we have it. And also comment, yeah. So now we fix all the errors. Now we can actually do a migration. So I'll just do add year. So before I continue, I kind of want to take a short break. And if you guys have any issues or problems, put your hand up. Is any of you guys not following? Is any of you guys following? Oh shit, that's a lot. Cough. So for anyone with questions, make sure to put your hand up. Let's close this. Cool, I'm going to just talk about the differences from some other ones. So you've noticed that on student, most of these are collections. So therefore, our type is collections. So therefore, we'll do it where instead. But for example, a comment would have a resolver for a singular student and a singular project. So if we go on comment type, you'll notice instead of doing a where query, we're doing a find async query. Interestingly, to use the find async query, we have to actually wrap our ID around with a new object. Unfortunately, that's how it is. So by rounding around an object, we can actually finally use cancellation token in this query. Like you'll notice some of the queries, like some of them are probably miss cancellation. So for example, these all have cancellation because it's lucky, I guess. Hey guys, we'll be moving on. The next part is really hard to get. But bear with me, because it's required for the thing to work. So I'm going to just talk some backstory about why there's an issue. So Hot Chocolate is a really cool library. It's really fast. It's also multi-threaded. So it can do a lot of stuff in parallel. But there's one drawback. Entity framework is not parallel. So you cannot. So a single database context cannot be run parallel. So it only can run you only can request one thing at one time. So if you try to use a database context for twice on two different like threads or two different in parallel, you'll get an error. The entity framework telling you that you can't do that. So the solution to this is to use multiple database contexts. So a good example of what we did at the very start is we used a pool of database context. But the issue about having this is when do you tell Hot Chocolate to use a different database context and not use the previous one? So what we want to do is instead of to use the database context, we will have to do some magic, which is we're going to use some extensions. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, a new folder. We're going to call it extensions. In extensions, we will be creating two different files. So we're going to create a first one. It's going to be called object. Let me remember the name. It's going to be called object field descriptor extension. Wow, that is long. I'm going to call it extension. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Should I put an S? I'm going to follow docs. Docs are nice. So what we'll do here is we're going to create a static method. I wish everyone knows Java or C# what a static is, but like, if you don't know, Google it. It's pretty interesting. So we're going to create a static method, and we are going to do, we're going to return an object field descriptor interface, and we're going to call it use app db context. And we're going to put a generic called a type of database context. Context, that's better. And in here, we are going to have two inputs. It's going to be, the first parameter is going to be the existing field descriptor. And this, where, like, even I have no idea what I'm typing right now. So basically, I just copied this from somewhere, and it just works. So I guess. So we're going to return a descriptor. And what it's going to do is we're going to use a scoped service. As you have noticed, in multiple locations, we've been using scoped service, but we're actually never using it because we never actually defined the scoped service. Here, we're going to actually define it. And in the scope service, we want to do two things. So when you use a scope service, what you want to do is when you start it, like when you create it, in the service, you want to create a new database context. So we're going to use we're going to get the service, required service. And we're going to create a new context, a new database context. So basically, we're going to use the factory we defined at the very startup to create a new database context every single time we use scope service. The reason is every time we use scope service, it will be random parallel, and we can't use the same context, so therefore we have to create one every single time. And once it's done, once the scope service finished running, we don't want to have a bunch of database connections, so we want to dispose it. So it's just a basic dispose method. So time to, so I need to change the class into a static class because I have a static method. And we need to import a bunch of stuff. Oh, wow, it's using a dependency injection. I totally know what that is. DB context, DB web. Why is this erroring? Circular import. So apparently I typed something wrong.
Is it where creating context states getting context change?
I am super lost.
the second one should be just the context.
Oh, this one. Ah, excellent. Thank you very much. Cool. Dispose. I'm missing a comma, and excellent. So now we're just doing a basic extension, and I'll show you where we're going to use it. So we're going to do a simple helper method called use app.db context attribute. So you've seen us use plenty of attribute. Here we're defining a custom attribute. And since it's an attribute, we need to extend object field description extension, descriptor attribute. So let me import that. Now we have a custom attribute, and we want to override the onConfigure, and we are overriding. Cool. So that's excellent. So we are overriding it. So instead, we'll do descriptor dot use db context app context db context. So therefore, we are just using the descriptor db context to use the database context. So it's just a simple wrapper that wraps it around. So now with our two extensions ready, we want to actually use those extensions. So if we go back to let me find it. So our models, GraphQL queries. We're going to edit this last. So first thing, we want to create a new query called project queries. So I'll teach you how to use the extensions that we just created in project queries. So we'll do project queries. So in project query, we just want to define a very basic GraphQL query. But instead, so to be able to define the queries, we just have to copy the first line as same. And now we can use the thing we just created, which is use app.db query context, which is the custom attribute we just created. And let's first import them first. And in here, we're going to do, we're not going to do it yet, but I plan to do it. So we'll first do a public iQueryable, just like the student queries. We're going to do a simple query. And we're going to use the scoped service, just like previous. So it's going to be app.db context and context. And in here, we're returning context of projects. And since we want the project in order, I'm just going to do a very simple order request by created date. So it's not context. Let's call it projects p ordered by p dot created date. So apparently, I need to import So it's saying that this doesn't contain definitions. Let me go check. Generate projects. Don't need to generate this. Interesting. Oh, I typed this wrong, so this is actually app DB context. And then I have to import app DB context. So now it actually works. Let me just format it nicely because the format's really garbage. And I will add another space. So now we have a new query called get projects. You'll notice that useDB is using scopes, is using the context. So if we open this, you'll notice it's using db.context, but where does this db.context come from? If you actually click into it, it actually jumps into the wrong one. Interesting. So this should not do that. So let me delete descriptor. I think I need to change this to something else. So for configure, this needs to be i.this. So this needs to be wait a minute. Okay. So I'm on the wrong one, right? So I need to go to extensions, context. Did I type something wrong in here? Object. Looks fine. I'm going to assume it's right, unless I format it. OK, it is right. Cool, so I just want to introduce you to something really cool. So in GraphQL queries, there's something called Pagination. So we can fetch data, and we can do pagination of data. Basically, what that means is we can fetch data by pages. So instead of getting all of the projects at once, we can actually filter them by 10 at a time or like 15 at a time, depending on your custom amount. So we're going to just use this use pagination method shown in annotations. We can just use paging, and it will enable it automatically. And that's what we're going to do. I believe people in the front end will probably teach you how to use it, but it's a really cool method. The reason you don't want to return everything in the database is so for example, imagine you have 1 billion records, and then you need to fit that through the network. It's probably going to take you forever. So that's why you want to limit the amount that people can actually request. So the best way to limit the amount and also allow them to request that many is use pagination. So we'll just add it on projects just for people. And also, we want to be able to get, since you'll notice this is get projects, we want to be able to get a single project by ID. So we're going to just add a new method. And since we're also using database context, we need to also use our custom attribute. We want to get a public project, and we want to get project, a singular project. And we can do scope service, app DB context. And using this, we also need an ID from somewhere, because we want to get the input. So we'll just add the ID at the front of the thing. So int ID. And using the ID, we can Let me close this up first. Using the ID, we can return, wrong place, return context project.find, and we can find the object by using the ID and returning it. So now we can get a singular project and also multiple projects. So for now, since I've already gone through this, I'm going to just do the same thing for students by copying the docs. So the docs, which is here, students. We will not be doing comments. We won't be doing comment queries because we don't see a point of actually querying for multiple comments and querying all the comments at once. So therefore, we will not be implementing a comment query here. So that should work, except I need to change this. So you'll notice it's actually exactly the same here where you'll notice it's exactly the same where I get a bunch of students and I get a singular student by using the ID. So once that's done, you'll notice that since we created project queries, we actually have to add it into our GraphQL server. We can add it inside here. So first things first, well, let's just add in a query. So we can add type extension project queries. So in project queries, we need to remove that first. And we will import this from projects. Now with a bunch of queries, however, you realize something, that I actually also have to import my project type, comment type, and student type. So to import this, we can actually use the method called addType. And the types we can add, let's just start with comment type. And we can add type, project type. And let's add the last one, which is student type. Cool, great. We've done a bunch of types, and we've added a query, and now we're ready to actually run the server. So let's try run the server. So now you see we have multiple queries now. We have students and student. So in student, you'll notice we have pagination, so we can actually have page info, edges, and nodes. If you just want to call a number of students, you can just call student nodes for an array list of students. This will return, I think, around like the default amounts. And here's just a bunch of students. And for example, for students, I can actually now add in a variable called ID to get a singular student by ID. And you'll notice how there are now two non-nullable signs for arrays. So for example, the array cannot be null, and the projects inside the array cannot be also null. So that's just like a type check. The reason we want everything to be non-nullable is that when you're in the front end, you don't want to accidentally get a null variable when you're writing JavaScript, because it sucks, I guess. And then imagine like writing code and then just getting returned a null variable, and then you're like, what do I have to do with it? You have to write checks for it. So you do not want to deal with that at all in the front end. So GraphQL will deal with nullable data directly. So if there is a nullable from our database, it would error out. So cool. This will conclude GraphQL queries. We'll be moving into mutations soon. If you guys have any questions, let us know. Hey guys, I'm going to move into mutations. There's still a lot more, so I'm going to go faster. Doesn't work because there's no data.
Oh, true.
Cool, we're going to implement mutations. So we're done for all the queries, and now we're going to try do some mutations. So I'm going to just clear everything because everything sucks. So now we're going to just define some mutations. We're going to do the same thing where I define one mutation, and then we just copy paste everything else, make life easier. So we're going to do add. Resolver? Which one? Project type. Did you add double defaults? Resolver class. Excellent. Cool, moving on. Mutations. So first thing before we're going to implement some mutations, one we're going to do is add student, another one we're going to do is edit student. So to start off, we're going to create a new class under GraphQL students, and we are going to create an input. So we're going to do add student input. So add student input, instead of doing a class, classes are for suckers. So we will do something called a record, which is basically a class, but it's like a short way of writing it. So we're going to call it public record add student input. And now in here, we want to do string is not nil, so name, and string is lowercase, right? GitHub. And then we have one more, which is, so apparently record isn't a curly bracket, it's a normal bracket. That's my fault. And now at the very end, to add a student, we also need their image URL. And since we just want to demonstrate it is actually optional, so to show that it's optional, we want to add a question mark after the type. But there's an issue where so the question mark is actually not enabled yet. So what we want to do is actually want to enable the question mark syntax. The easiest way to enable the question mark syntax is if we scroll up to the very top, we double click on our project, and I'll come up with this. What we'll do is we will just add we will enable the syntax by typing in newable, and we want to enable it. This is XML. If anyone haven't seen it, I hate XML. So if you guys ever show me stuff in XML, I'll puke. Great. Let me just reload this project. Now we have enabled the syntax. We can actually look. It's unloaded for some reason. It's going to take a while. Oh, apparently I don't have .NET Desktop, which is really weird. I wish this installs. That's weird. I wish this is fast, because I did not expect this. Well, it's only 87 MB. Unless it's multiple. Cool, it's downloading, installing. Well, I didn't expect this, but you gotta deal with it. How many people here are also installing? Or everyone's already pre-installed? I feel bad. Great, okay. So I need to add in one more. I have no idea why that happened. I don't even think it's a normal error. Why is this not liking me? Okay, excellent. Cool. So back to our project. Let me just reload this. OK, now my project's back. Amazing. I think I typed a typo, that's why. Great, so now we've enabled the syntax. We can actually add in the input. So this is basically our add input. To add a user, we need a name and a GitHub username. Image URL will be optional. So next, we will create a new thing. We're going to call it edit student input. Edit student input, just to save us time, I'm going to just copy this and paste it back. So I'm going to call it, so this is edit student input. So instead, we need an ID, but there's an issue of an ID. IDs in GraphQL are actually strings, so I'm going to use ID as string. And also, since I want to be more clear, I'm going to just write student ID. It actually doesn't matter, it depends on you. And then name will be knowable, so edit student input. I'm going to keep it ID instead. It doesn't matter. So edit student input, everything is knowable. That means when you edit it and you don't give it a name, it will not change the name. And if you don't give it a GitHub, it won't change the GitHub. And since we're using GitHub to log in, I'm going to just delete GitHub since I don't want users to accidentally change the GitHub. Cool, once we're done that, we can now create a new file called student mutations. So in student mutations, that's very similar to queries. Instead, we'll be building mutations. So we're going to do the same thing as copying this, but instead of query, we will use mutation. So in here, we'll be defining a couple of mutations, which is only two actually, which is our add mutation and our edit mutation. So in here, we're going to add in our use app DB context from our custom attribute. And once we're using the DB context, we can actually define our method. So we're going to just do an async method, student. So we're just having a task. We'll return a student. And it's a student async method. In C#, we like typing async at the end of our async methods to let the user know it's an async method. It's like a standard. So what we have here is we'll have input, student input, and we'll call it input. And then we will have the scoped db.context, service, and this is app db context, and this will be context. And after context, we'll also have cancellation in here as well. Cancellation token. So we have a cancellation token. Excellent. So let me just import all of these. And also import students. Cool. So now what we're going to do here is we will use Entity Framework to create a new student. So to do this, we need to do var student. This is actually really generic. So if anyone read any Entity Framework documents, it will all look the same. So we create a new object, student, And this new object, we are going to add the following. Name is equal to my input.name. And then name GitHub. And also image URI is equal to input.image URI. And now, you'll notice this is an error. You can fix this if you want, but for time constraints, I'm not going to fix it. So once we create this, we can actually now use context.students. We can now add a new student using the context and student as a singular student. Yep, there you go. So now we add a new student. And once we add a new student, now we have an ID. We actually have to save it. And we're going to use an async method to check if it's saved, since we want to wait for it to save. And if the user cancels it, it will be canceled, kind of thing. And we return the student once it's saved. Return students. And that's basically how we want to do this very simple add method. And we're going to do another method, which is edit student. So fastest way, I'm going to just copy this. And we're going to do edit student async. And then edit student async. Before you edit, you want to always query for the existing student. So edit student async. So let's query the student first, which is equal await context dot students dot find. So we're finding using async to find the student. And we want to grab them by using the ID. But however, the input ID is actually a string. So we need to convert it into an integer. So input.student ID, because I called it ID instead. And then async. I'm supposed to use cancellation, but I can't be bothered. And I'll just delete this. So to edit the student, you can just directly change the thing. But like to change the thing, normally you have to use like a lot of if statements, but I can't be bothered. So normally I like doing it with this syntax where I grab the name, and if it's equal to nil, it will become the original student name. And we can do this for every single one, including GitHub. We don't do GitHub, we do image URI. Cool. And then we save the student, and once it's saved, we return back to student. So this is a basic edit and add for students. So since I've gone through these two, I'm going to just copy for the rest to save time. So this is mutations, this is queries, mutations. OK, apparently it's not called mutations. So we have done up to, we haven't actually added the mutation. We could do that later. We have to add it, we added last, but first let's actually complete all the other ones. So for example, we're going to do an add project, edit project, and a project mutation, and also comments, add comment, edit comment, and comment mutation. So let's start off with project. Just make life easier. I'm actually lazier, so I'm going to just copy directly using the file. So using the I'm going to just copy directly from our implement mutation, which if we notice in our GraphQL, we have projects, we have add project, edit project, and also mutations. So I'll copy all of them, and jump to my project, which is this one. It is not this one. I think I have in the source. Let me go find it. Users, me, source, repos, and this is my repo. And then we can go to GraphQL projects, paste it in, and now with all of them, let me just pin to quick access for make my life easier. So we also need to want to copy the other ones, which is for comments. So we have comment mutation, edit comment, and the other one. Let me just, I want this one, not this one, and this one. So I'm going to just copy that. Cool, so since I need to change the names, let me just change them right now. So it's MSA yearbook with an underscore. That's done. And mod those. Excellent. I modified, I spelled it wrong again, so it's fine. Edit comment input is in the wrong yearbook, so that should do it. So that's completed for comments. Let me do it for projects, edit. And we go to mutations, and we can actually paste it in. Fix that, fix that, fix that, fix that, and more of those. Let's check for errors just in case. So I do have an error. It's modified because I spelled it wrong again. I'm just keeping spelling it wrong. I'm lazy. So now we've implemented all the mutations. We now have to add in the mutations to the startup GraphQL server. So we go to GraphQL server. We'll do the same thing just like this, but instead it will be called mutations. Mutations. Spelled it wrong. And then the mutations, this will also be student mutations, project mutations, and I also need comment mutations. Cool, so now we have implemented all the mutations and we have 0 errors. Let's try to run the thing. Feel free to open up the, I don't expect any of you guys to follow through all of that. So feel free just to open up the code for 7, mutation, implementing mutations on the repo. What is this? So there is an error. Let's go check it out. Console. So I failed to fetch it because there was a server root query has already been registered. So let me check why is that happening. Since I'm doing add query type instead of add mutation type, so what do add mutation type? I just rerun this. Cool, so now we can try refreshing it. Now with all the mutations. Since I'm very lazy and I can't be bothered typing mutations, I'm going to use Asomia. Asomia is a very nice tool. If you guys want to use it, feel free to download it. It's really small, but if you want. What I've done is I've actually done this. So if you go on the GitHub repo, you'll notice in the backend file, there's actually an Asomia file called export. Whatever. What you can do is you can download that file, and you can actually import it into Asomia. And once you import it, you can actually view all my queries here. So you'll notice that there is a bunch of comment queries, add comment, edit comment, add project. So now I can actually try them out. So first, let me just make sure the URL is correct, because I have multiple projects running. So let me just convert that. Oh, well, wait a minute. I'm sorry, guys, but like this Asomia is currently based on GitHub Auth. So I don't recommend using it yet, but I'm going to just use it as a template currently. So I'm going to just do a very simple mutation, and I'm going to add a student. Student has a name, so I'm going to call myself CZ, and it also has a GitHub. And the GitHub is a very generic GitHub name. I'm just type my GitHub name. And I also have an image URL. It's optional, so I don't have to type it. So I can actually now post a mutation like this. Scoped, and it would return you cannot connect to server. Why does that happen? That's weird. Let me actually try it in here. It should work. So starting mutation, and now there's an error, cannot return nil for non-nullable. The reason is image is null. And I return a non-nullable. So here's a very clear example of what happens when you set the input as a nullable input, but the output isn't nullable. So if we actually define the other input, we can actually view that it actually returns the correct thing. So I just write image URI. I typed this wrong. OK, apparently I typed URL for some reason, but that should be wrong. So now I can actually send this in, and it'll return me what I requested back. So when you do a mutation, like add student, it will always include, you have to always provide what fields you want it to be called back. So for example, I can like not get image URI back, and I can submit this, and it becomes another user. You'll notice the ID will increment, just as I said. SQL will automatically increment the ID for you. And since we have free students now, we can actually query for students. So let's do a very simple query for students. And we'll do ID and name. Since this is nodes, you have to do nodes first, because we're using pagination. So ID and name. So this should give me the free users I just created. So apparently there's an error. Data is null, cannot run on null. I feel like I know why, because I feel like there's a typo in my code. I guess I'll fix it later. Maybe I should fix it now. Let me actually debug it. Let me jump on Azure portal. I'm going to just view my database to show you guys that I actually am inserting into students. I have a password that I have. And now let's just view our students. So now we can see free students, and I'm going to just edit them. This is a preview, it's fine. If it crashes, no, I don't care. I have so much money, surprise. So I'm going to just type in a basic image just to cover this and save it. Cool. Should work. Well, if it, that's a mutation. I don't need this. Go back to GraphQL. Let's try this again. So now it works. Now I can get a bunch of students. That's just myself. I just inserted 3 of them. And how do you add a project? I'll just do a basic project addition. For our sake, I'm going to just use Asomia to copy the queries because I'm lazy. Maybe it's in the documentation as well. Forgot the documentation. Apparently it's not in documentation. I guess I'll just not show you guys. But basically, that's how you do mutations. I'm actually just do it for fun. So if we open up my Asomia, I'll just create a new link, and I'm going to paste it in. So we'll add a project. We need an ID. We don't need an ID yet. We need a student ID. Yep, it's telling me I'm missing student ID, so I'll just add in student ID here. And the student ID will be 1 because I am, I guess, user 1. So now I can actually add the new project, and it adds in project. So we can actually query projects. So if we try querying projects, we can get nodes, because this is, because I need kind of, it's under nodes. I can get ID, I can get the name of the project, I can get the link to the project, and also I can do a query for students. So under students, I can get the student ID and the student name. So let's try it out. You'll notice I am getting the project, I'm getting the project name, link of the project, and I also can get the student detail using a nested query. And just to prove it to you guys, I can actually get the student projects again, so it's like a nested query, and get the student again. So basically, the resolver is being able to do be able to resolve nested queries, just like the following. So as you can see, I called projects, and then I called student, and then I called projects, and then I called student again. So it's like recursively calling nested queries. Cool. So this will conclude mutations. I'm going to take a 10-minute break. If anyone want to ask any questions, feel free. Hey guys, we'll be moving to the final section, which is GitHub Auth. This is my favorite section because it's really cool, I guess. So try to follow along, I guess. If you feel free to open up the other one. Let me show you if you're not up to date or not up to date, I guess. You can use 7 onwards for the following tutorial. So currently we're on our final section, which is GitHub Auth. So I'm going to just go through it really fast so we can actually leave early, because I'm tired as well, just like you guys. So basically, what we'll do is, before we set it up, let me stop this first. Am I able to copy this? No, it's fine. I'm going to do it in a different order, just for fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to use GitHub Auth. Just letting you know how OAuth works is basically you sign in with GitHub. GitHub throws you a token, and you throw that token into the backend, and the backend verifies that it's a token, and then it gives you the information about the user. So that's a very high-level version of what OAuth is. So what we're going to do is basically create an OAuth account. So if we jump on OAuth, we can click on this amazing link. You can either click on this link, or you can click on your profile. You can follow me on GitHub, guys. you can click on settings, and after clicking on settings, you can scroll all the way down to developer settings. So notice you have 3 choices. You can click on OAuth app. So we're going to create an OAuth app. This is an example app I've been testing around. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new OAuth app. I'm going to just type MSA yearbook 2.0 because I already have one. Homepage URL, it doesn't matter. You can type anything, like actually it doesn't matter. Since we don't have a front end yet, that's why. But if we have a front end, the redirect URL will be the front end domain name. So for currently, I'm going to just set it localhost for fun. And a random port, because I like ports. And then we just register our application. And now we have a very basic OAuth application. So this is the client ID. It's very important. Make sure you copy it later. We can generate a GitHub secret when needed for the backend to verify the token. So back to the documentations. I'm going to just go forward because I can't be bothered coding. But you'll notice that you registered, you can type whatever link, and you can generate a token. So basically, that's your secret. You can have multiple secrets. Make sure you don't release your secret to anyone, because it's kind of dodgy for other people to use your get or off account. You'll be like reliable for all the damages made. So then you can have, so basically we want to add in our token inside our app setting development.json. Since we're putting all these secrets, we want to make sure you don't git commit this on any repo because they're secrets. So let's do this first because it sounds easy. So basically, we're going to go into app settings, development.json, and we can now set up our amazing tokens. So first things first, we're going to just set up GitHub first. And in GitHub, we have 2 different values. Make sure that it's JSON, so you need another comma there. And then just do client ID. Client ID is exactly what you just created. So what we have here in OAuth, we'll just copy this client ID. And also, we have a client secret. The secret, while you do not want to use your secret in the front end, always use it in the back end. I need to generate one, so I'll just click generate one. You can generate multiple. My password, does this work? OK, Google saves my password somehow. So I can now copy the secret. Make sure you copy it, because it will disappear once you refresh the page. I'll give you an example. Refresh the page, it's hidden. No one can steal it from you. You can revoke it by deleting it, and you can generate another one if you want. Make sure you always have one that exists, since you can't delete like your final token, I guess. And now we have secret and token. Just a heads up, since we're going to use JWT. JWT is a way of creating tokens, bearer tokens. JWT is encrypted with a, it's not encrypted, it's hashed using a secret. So we'll just create a very generic secret variable there that we're going to use later. So you can actually type anything, like legit anything. The longer the better, because you want no one to know this, and so when you hash stuff, it's unique every single time. Only you will know the hash is validated. And now, after doing this, I'm going to just skip down to the very bottom, where we look at login mutation. So basically, what you can do is now we can use this link, and we can just hit it on any browser. And we can just enter your client ID at the very end of this link. And now you can sign in with GitHub. So that's how you actually initialize a OAuth login, which is basically you create a link and also you can use the client ID. So basically, once you log in, it will redirect you to the website, which is basically what I typed in there. When I log in, it will redirect me. Give it some time. And you'll notice there's a code. This code is really important. You're going to use it to verify your user using the backend. So what you can do is, since you have the client ID and the secret, you can log in using GitHub's API, backend API, and you can verify that you can verify OAuth code here to create an access token, which you can use to access the personal details of the user that's logging in. So that's the basic workflow of OAuth. So we're going to now try implement it. And I am now about lazy, so I'm going to just copy everything. So we go to the startup script. We are going to set up authentication using bearer tokens. So what this does is it basically, when you add a bearer header into with a bearer token, it will automatically check if the token is valid and also check if the signature on the token is valid as well. So we can try that. So we're going to drop it into our services right here. We're going to put it after the database, but before the GraphQL, because I like it there. So I'm going to try import everything first before moving on. You'll notice that I am actually encoding our secret into bytes, and then using the bytes to act as a security key. It's called a key, a secret key normally, to hash our JWT token. I'll explain about how JWT work once we receive a JWT. So this will automatically add authentication to our application. If anyone want to look up how you do authentication and authorization on hot chocolate, you can also jump into the security tab where you have authentication and authorization. This is basically what I'm going to go through a little bit, but like this is a bare bone setup where you can actually understand it more. So I'll jump back to this. We now have authentication to our services. We want to use authentication to our app. So I'll just use that. So now that's done. Let's go back. And we already did this. We created a yearbook account. You can always create it with any other name. Normally, you want to use a trustworthy name so people know that you're actually the thing that you're described to be. And we've done our secrets. And now we want to create a new mutation. It's going to be login input. What does the login input do is basically you input the code that you got from GitHub OAuth. And then you can verify the user by sending back a JWT and their student information. So this is actually a payload. So instead of an input, we're going to have a payload and an input. So this is probably the first time we try to define a payload, a custom payload in our GraphQL API. It will be pretty useful to write custom payloads once you're like trying to make your own custom GraphQL API. So we're going to just do this right now. Just copy this. So we're just doing it in students because login is based on users and a student is a user. So we're just basically putting it in users. So we're going to put it in users mutation. And we need to first create the object for login input. So let's create that first. And login input is here. Wow, that's a lot. I don't know what's happened. Should be fine. So now we have that. And we can also now copy a login payload. So this will be what is returned after the query is set. Cool. And since this is imported, I need to change it, and it's mod do because I spelled it wrong. So now we can add in a new mutation inside students. So inside student queries, we can scroll down to the very bottom, and we can add a mutation with a login payload and also a login input. So what we're going to do here is we're going to return a payload like this. So I'm going to just describe this because this code is a bit complicated. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a GitHub client using the GitHub client ID and client secret. And we can also verify it using the code. So we're going to just copy this and throw it into there. So basically, we're using the official GitHub library. As you can see, it's OctaKit, using OctaKit. And we can use startup configurations to set it up. So you'll notice something very interesting here, that I'm trying to get configuration, but getting configuration is kind of hard because it actually exists inside startup. If you notice here, there's a configuration file here that is right here, and we want to get it. So what's the best way of getting it? I'm lazy, so basically I figured out a shitty method, which is we make configuration static. I'm not sure if it's in the documentation, but if we look at the code, we could make it static. And now configuration is not new here. Let me check what I actually did, because I actually forgot. Documentation completed. So I changed it a little bit. I set it as startup configuration and set private. So we made it static and make it private set. So making it static means that I am now able to access configuration statically. So I can access it from any other class, including here. I don't have to create an object. It just directly access configuration from startup. So you'll note, let's read the code actually here. So first thing, we create a request to verify whether the OAuth token is actually valid. So if it's valid, access token will actually not be null. And if it's null, we would throw a GraphQL error using an error builder in Hot Chocolate. For example, I'll set the message as unauthorized and set a build code. This is actually wrong, by the way. Like, that is bad standard. Normally, I would use, I'll show you a better standard inside Mutations. I think it's students, Mutations. I would prefer using this instead. Like, that's a better like error message. Sorry about the docs. They're kind of old. I mean, one day old. So therefore, we're just throwing a custom message with like auth not authenticated. Basically, your code is bad. And if we go back to here, we can now use, if we now have the access token, it wouldn't throw an exception. So therefore, we can run the next line of code, which is basically using the access token to get the current user. So we'll just grab the current user. So grabbing the current user, we can now check if the user actually exists in our database or not. So for example, we can, I think I missed a step here. So normally before that, we do a query to check whether if the user exists or not. So I'm using first or default. So by default, the user should have a name of an empty string. So basically, I'm using this to check whether if the student exists or not in our database. So if the user doesn't exist, I just basically use the information I got from GitHub to create a brand new user. So that's how it works. So if the user does exist, we skip the creating user step, and we basically just use the user based on here. And I just need to use entity core, and that's done. Cool. So it's basically create user or use existing user based on that. So if the user logs in with a fresh account, it will just create a user for them. So now, after creating the user, we know that we have a student object, and we need to create a bearer token. So this is how you create a bearer token. You just copy the following code. Basically, you use the same secret from where you verify it, and you sign it with the same algorithm that you decided previously. And you can also set up issuer and audience, which is basically yearbook and student. This is normally supposed to be domain names, but since we haven't deployed this, we are not using any domain names. And for fun, we'll just set it in 90 days because I don't want my token I don't want my JWT ever expiring. Normally, you'll set it to like a day or like 7 days. It depends on which company and how secure you want it. And I'll just set up credentials, which is basically how I'm signing my token. And now I can use this method to create a brand new token based on my settings from my JWT security token. And I'm just creating a new object to send back student and token using the login payload. Something I haven't covered is what are claims? So claims are information you can put on JWT tokens, which users can use to extract information from the token. So an example is, imagine, so what I did here is I added a claim for a student ID. So therefore, I'm storing the student ID inside my JWT. So whenever I am using the JWT, I know which student I am. So basically, authenticating saying that I am the student without using GitHub OAuth. So now we've created the login thing. Let's try it out. And it's a build error. Great. So code is actually capital letter. That's a typo in my documentation. I wish you guys caught that. So now we can actually run the application. Really cool. So before we actually move on, let's actually try out this. So we're going to copy our client ID onto an empty page, and we're going to just copy my client ID and just paste it in here. Since I'm already logged in, this will automatically redirect me. So I'll say you're logged in, so I'll just redirect you to your code. This code will be different every single time, as you can know, like it's if8s. If we try it again, can't try it again. So if we try it again, right? It will give you a completely different code every single time. Just shown here. So you're going to use the code. And once our GraphQL API is running, we'll do a mutation. Let's create a new one. We're going to do a mutation. And this mutation will be login. Let me just refresh my schema. You'll notice there's login now. And we can hit up login. And the login has an input of an object. And it has a code, which I'm going to post in here. And since this is an object, I need to return the payload. So I'm going to do student. And under the student, I'm going to get their ID, name, GitHub name, GitHub. And maybe we can get their image and see what happens. Student, ID, name, GitHub image. And let me get their token, JWT. As you can see, I think I'm already logged in because my GitHub name is already in the database. But we can actually try and see if it actually is. So now you'll see that I'm actually already existing in the database since my GitHub name is exactly the same as my GitHub name. Since you'll notice the image won't be changed, I'll give you an example of me not being signed up. So we just jump on Portal again, and we jump on Azure SQL databases, jump on my database, which is excellent. And we can just view our database, same password. I wish I could save my password. So now I'm logging in, and now I have tables, and I'm going to go to students. And I am going to edit these, and I'm going to zip this. It's not coming out. That's sad. Oh, it's out. Cool. I'm going to just change all of these to a different variable. So now I'm no longer actually in the database. So now that's done. We can actually try to re-verify this. To do this, I need to actually create a new code. What's my code? GitHub OAuth. I think it's this one. Might be not, but I don't know. I think it's not. Let me check. So it's if 9. So let me go back. So we'll try this again. So we'll just grab a brand new code because the code will refresh every single time. And if you use the code once, you can't reuse it because of how secure it is. So now we can copy this new code and just paste it in here. We can notice now we're creating a new user based on, it should create a new user. It crashed. Wow, that's very nice. So object reference is not set. So apparently it is actually not student isn't no. It's actually student equal no. No? Doesn't make sense. That actually doesn't make sense. It should work. Unless there's an issue with how the thing is verified. I'll probably fix this later. No, so name is no. So name is not equal to this, it's no. So that should work. It's a bit different because it's based on how my thing is defined. Sometimes I accidentally write code that's different every single time. It's quite normal. So like, it might work on the official completed one, but not on this. So let's actually retry and generate a new code. Oh, this sucks. I just have to copy it again. And since I changed this, I need to restart this. And leave. I don't need to see that again. And I'm going to just copy the startup code. New code, try it out again. If it doesn't work, I guess I'll just show you guys what a JWT is. So it still doesn't work. Object reference is no. Interesting. Is it because I don't have async? I do have async. First will default. A student no? If it's no, then it's not default, right? Should be default. A default cannot be no. The student knowable? Good question. Am I supposed to set this as default? Will that work? I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm assuming this will work. Cool, so we'll just change my code back. So it was student mutations, so it should be empty string. And let's try that. And since we need a new code, we need to jump on this, copy this, and just paste it in, create a new code. So we have new code, great. So we just paste it in. This should work unless, when this is flashing, I'm kind of scared. I flashed again. I guess. So if I skip this, so if I cancel this, this should return an error to my GraphQL server. It does not. It doesn't even send it back. Interesting. Let me check my previous code and see if there's any differences. Cancel first async. So current user. Maybe I'm using this wrong, completely wrong. Not too sure. So it should return a default value. Interesting. What'd you say? That should be the right variable. It should give me nothing because there isn't a user that has my name. So the idea is it should return.
On mine's particular, if you just go if student equals null, it should work.
Yeah, but if student equals no, I can't do this, right?
Can you create a new student inside? And then just
Okay, I can try that. Okay, I'll try that. Cool, excellent. So let me try student equals no. And then I can do context. Let me just create a brand new student then. So var new student. Yeah, I'm going to just replace student. So it's going to be new student. And then we will just grab in the rest of the things. I think it's curly brackets instead. I'm not too familiar with the syntax. Name. Is it just name? And columns. Yep, exactly. And then we will add it in. So it'll be context dot student dot add. And we're going to add the new student. This should work.
and the comma on line
Do I think it's fine.
fine?
Yeah, I think it's fine. There's no error. And maybe I stop this and it says not fine. Okay, I'm gonna assume this is gonna work. So let's try it out. And we're going to try to paste it in. Let's see what happens. Hey, we did it, boys. So now I can actually get my user. You'll notice there's an avatar. This is going to be my profile picture, as everyone can tell. And here's my JWT. So let me just explain what a JWT is. JWT is actually a really cool thing. You'll notice how we have a claim that we had previously. If we go on jwt.io, this is a great place for decoding JWTs. You can actually paste your JWT in here. We can notice what algorithm we use to hash this JWT, and it's actually a JWT as it says here. So you notice this is the red, right? So this red part is actually this part. This is all it's all encoded using base 64. So if you copy any of these parts and search base 64 converter, you can actually decompile these to text. So actually all of the data located in here is actually not secure, as you can see here. So you can just read directly, like really commonly through this. And you'll notice that this is actually located in here just like this. So you'll notice how we have a very simple name identifier for. So this is actually bad logic. We kind of want to change it, but we'll just keep it that way. We can change it later. So basically, what we're doing here is we're using a claim shown in student mutations. We created a claim here, which is claim name identifier, and we're using student ID. So in here, we can grab the student ID, which is 4. And this is the expired date shown here. It's like 90 days, I guess. And a cool thing about this is the signature. Basically what this is basically the header and the payload hashed together using the secret key to hash into this. So you'll notice it says invalid signature, right? So if we copy our signature from our app settings, we can actually show that the signature is actually valid. So this is our signature, and it actually hashes correctly to create the signature here. So we use the algorithm to hash the top and the bottom with the secret to create the secret. So that's how JWTs are kind of secure, because if no one knows your secret, no one can actually validate that that's the hash. So only you can validate the hash is correct, because you have you have the secret in the backend. So that's how JWT practically works, where you can store informations in here. The reason why you want to store information in JWT is, as you can see, I am just decoding it straight up. Decoding it is actually really fast. So it's way faster to store information on JWTs instead of storing on databases, because you have to wait for the data to retrieve from the database. So that's how we're going to use to verify stuff. So cool. So that's how we can create JWTs. We're going to move on to how do you actually authorize different requests from the user. So cool. As you can see, I've just a simple description here. And how do you authorize users? Basically, we can add a new tag attribute called authorize. So what this new tag does is, so this is a new method I'm creating in student queries. So let me stop this for a moment. So in student queries, we're going to create a new method called getSelf. So what is the difference between getStudent and getSelf is basically getStudent requires you to enter an ID. And if you getSelf, you don't require to get an ID. Basically, it just uses the ID from the claim shown previously to grab your ID. Using claims. So instead of actually using the shitty claim that I showed you earlier, which is the claim identifier, we actually want to identify it using a string. So we're going to identify it called, the string is going to be called student ID. And using this list of claims, we can actually extract the student ID by using student ID and the first student ID that comes out of the claims. Cool, so this is now authorized. So if we try run this, I think I might need to do one more step. So I actually need to do this first before running it. I need to add authorization to our services in our GraphQL server. Let me just pause this for a moment and actually add that in before we can actually use authorize. So now let's see what happens when I call getSelf without actually logging in. So I'm going to just yoink a query. And we're going to do query. And we're going to do get, let me just refresh the schema, just as usual. Now we can get self in here. So we're going to do a self query. And self, get my ID and name. So basic self query, right? So currently I'm not logged in. How do I know? Because I don't have a header token, and I haven't set up a header token. I haven't set up my bearer tokens. So therefore, it won't work. No, cancel. I do not want to see that. Can I close this? I can't because I am, oh, here it is. So we try to run this, and it crashes. Why? Because basically, sequence not match elements. It is actually not using authorize. That is an issue. Let me check what else did I miss. So I forgot to add authorize under the GraphQL server. So that's actually added in. So we'll add it somewhere, anywhere actually. You can actually add it anywhere. So we just added it in, and let's try it again. So it should tell me that I am not authorized when we're done. So we'll just send it. And now it says the current user is not authorized to access this resource because I am not logged in using the bearer token. So an example of that I can actually log in is, let me just first log in first, because I changed how it works previously. So we just get a code. After getting a code, we can now get a bearer token through login payload here. And it should give me the same ID, which is ID 4, I think. Yep. And I can just copy this token. This is a reason why I like Asomia, but like a cool thing we can do is we can query. Let me just paste it in, bearer token in here. We just paste in the bearer token, and we can copy self. So now, using this self query, and we have a bearer token now, we can actually get myself. Apparently my URL is completely wrong, so let me fix that. So we can actually get myself. So I don't need to actually use student ID to get myself. So since we have a bunch of queries, right, you'll notice that, for example, when we add a comment, we're actually submitting, when our input actually includes student ID. We no longer actually need student ID inside our inputs, because it is actually in the token if we use it to verify the user. So this is also true to your project. So for example, I no longer need to actually when I add a project, I no longer need to actually have a student ID on the project, because if you're logged in already, the student ID will already be in the token. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change how the logic works in most of our things. Like for example, we are going to change how the mutation works. For example, we're going to remove student ID, and we're going to get student ID from the claim, shown here. So that's how we're going to get student ID from the claim. And instead of using the student ID from the input, make sure you grab the student ID from the claim. And since it's also a string, you also need to convert it into an integer. So it's the same case for edit. The only thing you need to change is you want to check if this project is actually owned by the student before the student is allowed to edit the project, because you want to make sure only the owner of the project can edit their project, not anyone else. So that's what we're going to add here. And after that, we can actually remove student ID from the input list inside add project inputs, and we just remove student ID in here, which is excellent. Make sure to do it for every place where you remove student ID. It's really important. Or else someone will be like, why is there student ID here, even though you don't need it? So in comment mutation, you're going to do exactly the same thing, where you use the student ID, and you replace it with the student ID input in the input. Also, make sure you check. So it's actually exactly the same thing. So like, just copy it. There's no point of me explaining it again. And remove it as well. And now back to student. We no longer need the add student mutation. So we actually can remove the add student mutation from our list, because now when you log in, you will be created as student automatically, and you'll never need that. So we can delete that mutation. And in edit student, we want to change it so that the only student you can edit is yourself. So we will no longer have a student ID in the edit student input. So hey guys, I guess this is the end. But just before we end, I just want to show what the final product is, because I haven't actually copied the code. Because so this is a version of the code that actually works. We already added a bunch of auths, and we removed student ID to most of the queries, and we can actually run the thing. And basically, this is our final list of mutations: login, edit user, and there's no student ID in edit user because you can actually only edit yourself. I would recommend we rename this mutation to edit self in the future if you ever want to make it more consistent. And with a login payload, exactly just like how we did it previously. And add, edit, add comment. I think there's a query. We can see whether we can edit stuff if we want. Since my database is actually, you'll notice how it's been an hour, so my database would be closed on this version of the repo. So you'll notice how it's loading for quite a while. This is guaranteed going to have an error, so I'm going to just restart it and see whether it gives me back. Do I even have the database set up? I might not even have the database set up. But that's the final product. OK, yeah. So this is what happens when you can't get your database. So basically, it just times out for you. It's quite normal. And we're going to just end here. I just want to congratulate everyone for staying for quite a long time, guys. Congratulations for finishing the tutorial of the backend. There's still plenty of stuff you can try to learn and advanced features you can look into. The first advanced feature I want you guys to look into is data loaders. So you'll notice how the resolvers work in the current scheme is the resolver will call to the database once every single time it is called. Instead, we might want to use a data loader to batch call all our data, so you do not have to call it every single time, slowing down your database. So there are also some links down here you can check out. And also, if you like my work, hit the follow button. Thanks, guys.
Wow, first of all, I just want to say that was actually incredible, ZZ. Like, I think those were some pretty advanced stuff, and even I myself seeing that, I was pretty mind blown after like 10 minutes in. But it was really, really awesome, and I think GraphQL is becoming more and more popular. Like, even at work, a lot of people are starting to talk about using like GraphQL and stuff. So what I'm going to do is definitely I'm going to go home and learn more about this and go through ZZ tutorial, just so that I make sure I understand how I can utilize this at work. I'm not going to be covering any more sessions, so don't worry about it, guys. Don't get scared and run away. But I just want to point out a section that's basically after this, and it is DevOps. Yeah, so you might notice there's a next section, DevOps here, where I've written a little guide on how you can set up a quick CI/CD pipeline. Essentially what it does is that it will just allow you to automatically deploy your backend application onto Azure. So that way, I know it's not super exciting to go onto it, but essentially if you deploy it to Azure, then it becomes publicly accessible. I mean, you can connect, you can even show it to your friends that, hey, I've got GraphQL running, go and have a look. But yeah, have a read through that one. But again, I would probably focus on understanding the GraphQL part first, which is what CZ covered today. But yeah, have a look into DevOps once you get a good grasp of it. Cool, that's for me.
Sweet as. So I guess that's all for today. So we've pretty much covered the back end. So I mean, we will hang around a little while after, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to come down, ask us, whatnot. In terms of next week, so now that you guys have built the back end, we can then, so next Saturday we can start building the front end, meaning we can build the web app that will start to communicate and make API calls to get this data, so being able to log in, through a website, and then getting that data in terms of the GitHub links. So that's all next week. And I guess if you guys got stuck anywhere, the code is in the backend folder. So if your code isn't working at the moment, that's totally cool. It won't stop you from coming next week. All you'll need to do is pretty much just go to the backend folder on GitHub and then just download the completed project. And you can have a play around. You probably need to change some things like the configs, so it reaches the configs that you set up for your database in Azure. But yeah, I guess that should be it. Yeah, anything else I needed to cover? That's it, yeah.
Just a reminder that the workshop next week will be in different locations, so just make sure to check out the repository where we have the workshop locations. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you haven't already, just make sure you read the assignment and understand what's needed for phase 2. So just need to think about what projects you want to create, etc. So you have about a month and a half-ish to create phase 2 project. So still quite a bit of time. So just need to think about what you want to do for phase 2 project.
Yep. I guess just on that phase 2 project, we'll touch on the assignment sheet next week as well, so it might seem a little bit confusing still. But once we've built the front end, probably the end of Saturday, so at the end of the next workshop, we'll talk through the assessment sheet again in a little bit more detail and kind of explain what you guys need to do. Yeah, cool.
Can we all just give yourself like a good round of applause? Because you know, like phase 1 this year definitely was not easy. Like congratulations for surviving this long and having to pass that Azure fundamental. I'm sure it took quite a bit of efforts as well. This is the first time we ever required students to like pass it. But it will definitely come in handy when you go and do interviews and stuff. Because again, even at work, it's like very endorsed. Like at my work as well, they kept saying like, oh, you guys should all do Azure fundamental and stuff, and having that straight out of uni is really useful. Yeah, so well done, guys.